She stood ready, every test aced, every flight perfect. But the officer just scoffed. Playing Call of Duty doesn't make you a pilot. He stamped reassigned across her dreams, sending her to a desk. Little did he know, her silence held a secret that would shake the entire base. Reagan Shaw stood perfectly still at the flight operations desk. Her uniform was crisp, her posture flawless. She'd completed every single requirement for Apache helicopter training. Her test scores were spotless, her flight evaluations not just good but impeccable, marking her as one of the most naturally gifted pilots in her group. But her assignment packet had just been returned with a red stamp across the top. Rerouted. Not to advanced flight training as expected, but to logistics administration duty. The officer handling her paperwork, Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Mendez, didn't bother hiding his condescending amusement. Mendez, in his early 40s, wore faded aviation branch patches that spoke of past glories rather than recent flight time. His silver wings were earned decades ago during peacetime, when qualification standards were different and combat experience wasn't a must for advancement. "Let me guess," he said with obvious sarcasm, flipping carelessly through her personnel file without actually reading it. "You grew up playing Call of Duty and somehow convinced yourself that video game experience qualified you to handle real military aircraft?" Reagan kept her professional silence, her expression neutral despite the deliberate insult. "Look, I'm going to be completely honest with you," Mendez continued, his tone dripping with patronizing authority. "Flying Apache helicopters requires people who genuinely understand threat assessment, complex avionic systems, and high-pressure decision-making under combat conditions, not someone who thinks flight school is some kind of equal opportunity program." He signed the transfer with a practiced flourish, clearly enjoying his power to redirect her career path. "I'd suggest you report to the administration building on Monday morning, paperwork and logistics coordination. That's probably more aligned with your actual skill set." Reagan accepted the reassignment document without protest, rendered a crisp military salute, and departed the office. Outside, desert wind scattered dust across the active flight line where Apache helicopters sat in neat rows, their rotors secured against the constant breeze. The afternoon sun reflected off cockpit glass, creating brief flashes of light that reminded her of muzzle flashes she'd seen in different circumstances, in places most people couldn't imagine. No one in the administrative office noticed her combat boots were worn in specific patterns that indicated significant time spent on helicopter landing zones, not the pristine appearance of fresh-issue equipment. No one observed she didn't flinch when aircraft engines started nearby, the automatic response of someone accustomed to sudden rotor noise and mechanical sounds. No one bothered to ask about her previous assignments, or why a chief warrant officer of her rank would be seeking additional helicopter training. Most importantly, no one had actually read her complete military service record. But someone with actual authority was about to discover exactly who Reagan Shaw really was, and why her silence carried more weight than most people's loudest boasts. She walked toward her temporary quarters, carrying the weight of unspoken experience and unrecognized expertise that would soon demand acknowledgement from people with the wisdom to read between the lines. 2 days later, in the quiet of his private office, Colonel Marcus Fielding, commanding officer of the 3rd Combat Aviation Brigade, was going through his usual weekly review of personnel transfers. It was typically just routine paperwork, pilots moving between units, maintenance crews getting special training, the constant shuffle of military careers. He sipped black coffee from his favorite mug, scanning names and unit details with practiced ease. Then, one specific line on a transfer document made him pause mid-sip. "Shaw, Reagan. Reassigned from Apache Airframe Transition Training. Previous unit designation, 160th SOAR." He read the entry again, more slowly this time. He carefully set down his coffee mug and stared at the document. His aide, Captain Elena Ramirez, noticed the sudden change in her commanding officer's demeanor. "Sir, is there a problem with the personnel reports?" Fielding didn't answer right away. Instead, he clicked a link to access Reagan's complete military service record, information the processing officer had clearly not bothered to look at thoroughly. What appeared on his computer screen made him lean back in his chair with genuine amazement. The 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, the United States Army's most elite aviation unit, specializing in covert insertion and extraction missions under the most dangerous conditions imaginable. Pilots didn't just apply for the 160th. They were hand-selected after years of exemplary service and underwent the most rigorous training and psychological evaluation processes in military aviation. There were absolutely no tourists or casual participants in that unit. He scrolled through Reagan's documented service history with growing disbelief. Chief Warrant Officer Reagan Shaw, 620 combat flight hours logged in hostile airspace across multiple deployments. 2 emergency extraction missions conducted under direct enemy fire. Classified operational notes indicating successful coordination with Joint Terminal Attack Controllers for precision close air support during nighttime blackout conditions. Military decorations included the Air Medal with Valor Device for heroism in aerial flight, the Joint Service Commendation Medal for exceptional performance during combat operations, and Flight Safety Certification at Tier 1 level, the highest classification available to military aviators. Colonel Fielding pushed back from his desk, processing the implications of what he'd just discovered. Captain Ramirez, who was the processing officer responsible for rerouting this particular assignment packet. According to the signature, sir, that would be Lieutenant Colonel Mendez at the flight operations desk. Fielding studied the transfer document again, noting the casual dismissal of someone whose qualifications exceeded those of most pilots currently serving in his entire brigade. Has Chief Shaw reported to her new logistics assignment yet? I believe she's scheduled to begin administrative duties on Monday morning, sir. Fielding reached for his secure telephone line, already figuring out how to address this significant oversight in the personnel system. Get me Chief Shaw immediately, and Captain, handle this communication discreetly. I suspect we're dealing with someone whose actual capabilities were severely underestimated. He hung up the phone and returned to Reagan's service record, noting additional details that painted the picture of an exceptional aviator who had earned her credentials through genuine combat experience, rather than peacetime training exercises. The 160th didn't accept pilots who couldn't perform under pressure. They didn't keep personnel who couldn't meet the highest standards of military aviation, and they certainly didn't recommend people for additional training unless those individuals had demonstrated both competence and commitment at the most demanding levels. Reagan stood in the polished hallway outside Colonel Fielding's office, maintaining perfect military posture. She was internally preparing for whatever administrative issue had prompted this unexpected summons. She hadn't been called to a commanding officer's office under these circumstances since her final debriefing in Afghanistan, when operational tempo was measured in hours rather than days and every conversation carried the weight of life or death decisions. The heavy wooden door opened, and Captain Ramirez gestured professionally. "Ma'am, Colonel Fielding will see you now." Inside the spacious office, decorated with unit photographs and military commendations spanning decades of service, Fielding chose not to sit behind his imposing desk. Instead, he gestured toward a comfortable chair while remaining standing himself, a gesture of respect that immediately caught Reagan's attention. "Chief Shaw, I've just completed a thorough review of your previous unit assignment and service record." She offered a single, precise nod. "Yes, sir. I need to understand why you didn't provide any clarification or additional information when Lieutenant Colonel Mendez reassigned you from flight training to administrative duties." "I wasn't specifically asked for clarification, sir. The processing officer made his decision based on whatever information he chose to review." Fielding studied her carefully, noting the calm professionalism that spoke of someone accustomed to maintaining composure under significantly more challenging circumstances than office politics. "According to your documentation, you've logged substantial flight hours with the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. Were those actual combat missions or training exercises?" "Operational missions, sir. Real-world deployments with active engagement parameters." Then help me understand why someone with your documented experience and qualifications was even enrolled in basic Apache transition training. You've already flown more dangerous missions than most of my current pilots will see in their entire careers. Reagan considered her response carefully before speaking. Because this wasn't about proving that I could fly Apache helicopters, sir. It was about proving that I still wanted to fly them. Fielding nodded slowly, recognizing the deeper meaning behind her words. Combat veterans often struggled with transition back to routine military operations after experiencing the intensity of special operations deployment. The officer who redirected your assignment packet made his decision based on incomplete information and personal assumptions. That's not uncommon in my experience, sir. He moved closer to his desk, pulling out a fresh assignment document that had already been prepared. You're not reporting to administrative logistics duty, Chief Shaw. She looked up with the first sign of genuine interest she'd shown during the conversation. You'll be reporting to Delta Company, 1st Battalion Apache Attack Helicopter Unit, effective immediately. All necessary paperwork has already been processed and approved through proper channels. Understood, sir? Understood, sir. Before you leave, is there anything else I should know about your background or preferences that might affect your new assignment? Reagan's expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle shift in her posture that suggested she was accessing memories from her Special Operations service. Only that I tend to perform most effectively during night flight operations, sir. Colonel Fielding allowed himself a thin smile of appreciation, recognizing the understated reference to her Night Stalker background. I would expect nothing less from someone who served with the 168th SOAR, Chief Shaw. As Reagan prepared to leave, Fielding made one final observation. For what it's worth, Chief, I've reviewed the service records of every pilot currently assigned to this brigade. Your combat experience and flight qualifications exceed those of officers who outrank you by multiple grades. Lieutenant Colonel Mendez made a significant error in judgment. Permission to speak freely, sir? Granted. His error provided me with valuable information about the importance of ensuring that decision-makers have access to complete and accurate information before making personnel determinations that affect operational readiness. Fielding recognized the diplomatic ways she just described institutional prejudice without filing a formal complaint. Dismissed, Chief Shaw. Welcome to Delta Company. Within days, Reagan was back in her element, starting with flight simulators for quick refreshers. Soon, she moved to cold engine starts and pre-flight routines, quickly progressing to full flight certifications for Apache operations in the brigade. Her assigned crew chief, Specialist Rodriguez, a 22-year-old with more bravado than real maintenance experience, offered a skeptical observation during their initial meeting. Ma'am, with all due respect, are you sure you're not just here to fill some kind of diversity quota? He murmured, just loud enough to be heard but quiet enough to shrug off. That dismissive attitude vanished the moment he saw Reagan execute a perfect instrument landing. It was total darkness, no radar, against a crosswind that would challenge pilots far more experienced. She touched down precisely on the designated markers, showing no stress or hesitation, as if severe weather was simply another routine operational detail, not an emergency. Word of her capabilities swept rapidly through Fort Candler's aviation circles. Pilots who had initially doubted her began requesting opportunities to fly training missions alongside her, recognizing that her deep experience offered learning opportunities unmatched elsewhere. Maintenance teams quickly realized she possessed an intuitive grasp of helicopter mechanical systems, a knowledge only gained from extensive, demanding real-world operations. Lieutenant Colonel Mendez, the officer who had initially rerouted her, faced a formal administrative review. Nothing dramatic, no career-ending consequences, just a quiet reassessment of his decision-making process and how he evaluated personnel qualifications. Reagan never spoke of her Night Stalker background or her Special Operations service record. Yet military personnel who had served with the 160th SOAR recognized her immediately through subtle cues that civilians would never pick up. The tactical awareness in her approach to aircraft, her unconscious habit of checking for escape routes and defensive positions. the unwavering calm that comes only from working in environments where errors are lethal. One morning, an unsigned, handwritten note appeared on the squadron bulletin board, clearly from someone who knew her true past. Don't ask where she came from, just try to keep up with where she's going. One evening, after a flawless night training exercise, Colonel Fielding found Reagan on the flight line, finishing her post-mission equipment checks. You've made quite an impression on the unit, Chief Shaw. I've simply maintained standard operational procedures, sir. Exactly. And that standard appears to be considerably higher than what most people expected. Reagan secured the last panel, turning to face her commanding officer. Sir, permission to make an observation? Granted. The most dangerous assumption in aviation is that you already know everything you need to know about someone based on incomplete information. That assumption has killed more pilots than enemy fire. Fielding nodded, appreciating her sharp insight. I suspect Lieutenant Colonel Mendez learned that lesson recently. Learning experiences are valuable for everyone, sir, even when they're uncomfortable. As Reagan headed for the maintenance hangar to complete her paperwork, Fielding reflected on how close his brigade had come to losing an exceptional pilot to prejudice and baseless assumptions. Often the most qualified individuals are also the quietest about their skills, preferring to let their performance speak for itself. Her story proves it. Real power shines through quiet action. If you value true skill and believe in the strength of silent resolve, you belong here. Subscribe to Quiet Soldier Stories and be part of our community. Discover more tales where actions speak louder than words.